I pressed my palm against the vinyl seat of the taxi, trying to steady the tremor that hadn't left me since the hospital. My chest still ached faintly, the memory of wires and beeping machines clinging to me like a second skin. The driver hummed to a country station on the radio, the sound distant and tinny. I stared out the window at rows of oak trees that bent under the early spring wind each mile, carrying me closer to what I thought would be safety. My body longed for my own bed, for the comfort of faded quilts, and the scent of lavender sachets tucked in drawers. I imagined the quiet of my little kitchen, where the kettle whistled in familiar tones, and the sunlight filtered through lace curtains I had chosen 30 years ago. Home was supposed to mean rest, not worry. After the hospital, I believed I had earned at least that. The taxi slowed as we turned into my street, a familiar line of modest houses standing shoulder to shoulder like old companions. I let out a shaky sigh of relief. But as we drew closer, the air shifted heavy and wrong. It was the sight of color scattered on the sidewalk that first caught my eye. At first, I thought it was litter. Then, as the car crept forward, I recognized the pale pink cardigan I had knitted last winter lying crumpled beside the gutter splashed with dirty water. My breath caught. "Here okay, ma'am?" the driver asked. I could barely nod. My throat had gone dry, the fragile hope I had carried all the way from the hospital shattering with every step I took toward the curb. Clothes were everywhere, my clothes skirts, blouses, even undergarments thrown in a heap beside the trash bin. Shoes jutted from a half-empty box, one of them a pair I had saved for decades because my late husband once told me I looked beautiful in them. I stumbled forward, the ground unsteady beneath me. My overnight bag slipped from my hand, landing with a dull thud. Then I saw it, a piece of paper taped to my front door, bold letters written in thick black marker, uneven and cruel. "Don't come back. This is my house now." The words blurred before me as though the ink had spread inside my chest. I reached for the doorframe to steady myself, the paper trembling in my hand. The house, my house, loomed silent and shut curtains drawn tightly, as if it no longer knew me. My knees wavered, but I forced myself toward the pile of clothes. Something sharp jutted from the mess, a folder half buried beneath a crumpled blouse. I bent down slowly, each motion tugging at the weakness still lingering from my hospital stay. When I pulled it free, I froze. Inside the folder was a sheaf of papers, their corners bent as though they had been handled too often. On the top page, my name stretched in looping handwriting, familiar but wrong. I stared at the signature, my stomach turning cold. It was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't. The letters sagged oddly, the rhythm broken. The paper itself was official, stamped faintly with a notary seal. I scanned the line of text above the forged signature. Authorization of property transfer. My breath left me in a ragged gasp. This wasn't just cruelty. It wasn't simply someone throwing my life onto the curb like garbage. It was a plan, calculated, deliberate, to take everything I had worked for. A car passed by slowly, the driver glancing at me before speeding away. I pressed the paper to my chest as though holding it close might shield me from the enormity of what it meant. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. All those years, every night shift at the hospital, every double shift taken to keep the mortgage paid, every sacrifice I had made so Seraphine would grow up with security, it all rested inside these walls. And now, someone was trying to erase me from them with the stroke of a pen I hadn't held. The cardigan lay at my feet, mud-soaked and pitiful. I bent, picked it up, and hugged it to myself, the wool damp and cold against my skin. My heart pounded hard, a painful rhythm that echoed the machines I had just left behind in the hospital. I lifted my eyes back to the door, to the hateful words still taped across it, and clutched the forged papers tighter in my hand. Whoever had written those words hadn't only wanted me gone, they wanted me erased. And as the wind rustled the paper, my neighbor's shadow fell across the lawn, drawing me out of my shock and into the next moment I would never forget. The sound of footsteps crunched across the grass, quick but hesitant, and I turned to see Mrs. Caldwell hurrying from her porch. Her gray cardigan flapped in the wind, and her face, lined with the softness of age and the sharpness of long memory, was etched with worry. She slowed as she reached me, lowering her voice as if the walls of my house themselves might be listening. "Eleanor," she whispered, touching my arm gently. "I didn't want to tell you like this, not while you were sick, but you deserve to know the truth." I clutched the soggy cardigan tighter against my chest, the forged papers trembling in my other hand. My throat ached, but I forced the words out. "Tell me." She glanced at the door, then back at me, her eyes glistening with pity. "Thomas hasn't been alone here. There's a young woman. She's been staying for days. I've seen her car parked out front every night." "And Eleanor." She paused, swallowing hard. "He introduced her to the delivery man as his partner. Like you never existed." The words landed with the weight of a blow. My knees gave way and I sank onto the front step, the wood rough and cold beneath me. I felt the cardigan slip from my grasp, landing on the dirt. Betrayal wasn't new to me. Thomas had always been brash, dismissive, too eager to find fault. But this was cruelty, sharpened into something permanent. I wanted to deny it. To think perhaps Mrs. Caldwell had been mistaken. But I could still hear the faint echo of laughter behind the door, a woman's laugh blending with Thomas's low voice. And worse than the sound was the silence of another name, the one that had not crossed my daughter's lips when I'd called her minutes before. Seraphine, my only child, my flesh and blood. When I begged her to explain, she hadn't defended me. She hadn't even pretended surprise. She had simply told me to let it go, her voice flat and distant. I pressed my hand over my heart, the ache of my recent surgery mingling with something far deeper. My daughter's absence was louder than Thomas's betrayal. She knew. She must have known. And she chose him. Mrs. Caldwell lowered herself beside me, her knees cracking softly. "You can't stay out here like this, dear. You'll make yourself worse. But you also can't let them take this from you." Her voice, though quiet, carried a strength that pulled at something inside me. "I don't understand," I whispered, staring at the scattered trail of my clothes. "After everything I gave, after all the years in this house, how could she? How could they?" My voice cracked, and I couldn't finish. Mrs. Caldwell squeezed my hand. "Because they're counting on you to be too tired, too sick to fight back. But I've seen you, Eleanor. I remember you working those shifts, coming home at dawn, and still mowing your own lawn before you even slept. You've carried more weight than anyone I know. Don't let them think you're finished." Her words steadied me more than I expected. I drew in a long breath, though my chest burned with it. The tears threatening to fall clung to my lashes, but I refused to let them spill. I would not give Thomas or anyone peering through those curtains the satisfaction of seeing me broken. The papers in my hand rustled as the wind shifted. The forged signature gleamed dark against the page, the letters mocking me. Someone had taken the time to practice my name, to twist it into a tool, to shove me out of my own life. I folded the paper carefully, slid it into my bag, and stood with as much steadiness as my legs could manage. Mrs. Caldwell rose beside me, her hand light against my elbow. "I'm not finished," I said softly, though more to myself than to her. My voice trembled, but the words held. They may think I'm weak, but they're wrong. From inside the house came the muffled thump of footsteps, then a door shutting deeper within. My body stiffened, my eyes locked on the window curtains that swayed slightly, as though someone had just moved away from them. And in that tense silence, I realized the fight for my home had already begun. The front step creaked under my weight as I straightened myself, my palm pressed against the door. The note still fluttered where I'd torn it free, the tape leaving a sticky shadow across the wood. My chest heaved as I raised my fist and pounded hard. Thomas. My voice cracked against the stillness of the street. Open this door. I'm home. For a moment there was only silence and then faintly laughter. A woman's laugh, light and careless, answered by a man's low rumble that I recognized instantly. The sound coiled around me like a cruel echo. My knuckles struck the door again, harder. This time. Thomas, it's me. Open this door right now. No answer. Just muffled movement inside the scrape of a chair. The low murmur of voices as if life inside those walls carried on without me. I pressed my ear to the wood, and though the words blurred, I heard my name twisted in Thomas's voice, followed by the woman's laugh again. My stomach turned. Heat surged through me, anger battling exhaustion, but I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. My thumb hovered before I finally pressed the familiar number. The call rang longer than I expected before my daughter's voice answered, cool and detached. Mom relief spilled into me for an instant. Seraphine, thank God. I need you. I just got back from the hospital. Thomas has locked me out of the house. My clothes are in the street. There's a woman inside Mom. Her voice cut sharp, almost impatient. Please don't start this. The words stunned me. Don't start this, Seraphine. I'm standing outside my own home. He's thrown everything out, your father's things, my things. There's someone else in there. A pause followed, and I strained for the sound of compassion, the warmth that had once defined her. Instead, her reply landed cold as ice. You've been sick. You should focus on getting better, not stirring up drama. Maybe it's better this way. You can let things go. Let things go. My voice rose, my breath hitching. This is my house, the one I built for you, the one I've paid for all these years. Seraphine. How could you say that I can't get in the middle of this? She said, her tone flattening into dismissal. Thomas is my husband. You know that. I have to stand by him. Her words rang in my ears, hollowing out the space in my chest. I wanted to scream that marriage didn't erase blood, that loyalty shouldn't mean choosing a man over the mother who had carried her, who had worked until her bones ached to keep food on the table. But the line had already grown too thin between us. Seraphine. I whispered, my throat raw. Please. I need you. But the only reply was silence, then the sharp click of the call ending. The phone slipped from my hand onto the step with a dull clatter. I stared at it, unable to move the world around me, blurring into muted colors. My daughter had not only refused to help me, she had turned her back sided with the man who was shutting me out. The laughter inside returned, as though mocking me louder this time. I pressed my palms against the door, my forehead resting against the grain. The cold wood offered no comfort. All I could hear was Seraphine's voice, telling me to let it go, as though decades of sacrifice could be dismissed with a sigh. I thought of her childhood, of scraped knees and late-night fevers of lullabies sung in this very house. I thought of the years I worked double shifts so she could go to college without debt. Every memory struck like a blade, each one cutting deeper, as I realized none of it mattered to her now. The betrayal wasn't only Thomas's. It wasn't only the forged papers or the stranger's laugh echoing through my home. It was my own blood choosing silence over truth, comfort over loyalty. I lifted my head, wiped the dampness from my cheeks, and gripped the handle of my bag tighter. The door remained closed, but something inside me shifted, hardening against the weight of loss. Behind me, the street carried on as if nothing had happened, but in front of me, those walls pulsed with betrayal, and in the silence that followed, I knew the battle was no longer just for a house. It was for the place I held in the life I had built. The afternoon sun sank lower, stretching long shadows across the street. I stood rooted on the step, my clothes scattered across the lawn, like evidence of a crime no one else wanted to name. A breeze lifted the sleeve of one of my blouses and set it fluttering. From across the road, a couple slowed their walk, their dog tugging at its leash. The woman's eyes darted to the pile, then to me, and she leaned into her husband's shoulder, whispering something that carried just enough for me to catch the sharp edge of pity. Another car rolled by its driver rubbernecking before speeding on. My cheeks burned hotter than the afternoon air. I pulled my cardigan tighter around me, though it was already damp from the gutter. The humiliation felt like a second skin, heavy, unavoidable, exposed to every gaze that passed. This house had once been my sanctuary, the center of everything I'd worked for. Now it was a stage where strangers could watch my life unravel. The ache of betrayal deepened into something raw shame. My eyes fell to the lawn, where the box of shoes had tipped spilling pairs across the grass. I bent to gather them, my hands clumsy, the effort of bending, pulling at the soreness still lingering in my chest. As I reached for a pair of flats, a corner of paper peeked out from beneath them. I lifted it slowly, and my breath caught. It was a photograph worn and frayed along the edges. My family portrait. Seraphine at 16, smiling awkwardly in braces. Thomas with his arm draped possessively around her shoulders, and me standing on the other side. But my image had been torn clean away. Only Seraphine and Thomas remained intact and smiling, their faces framed by the jagged edge where mine had once been. I stared at the gap, a void where I had been erased as if I had never belonged there at all. My hand shook as I held the photo closer, my heart thundering so hard it drowned out the sound of the street around me. I remembered that day. It had been taken in front of this very house, the garden blooming behind us. I'd worn my favorite blue dress, the one Seraphine had said made me look too cheerful for someone always working. I had laughed, then brushing it off, believing it was just teenage bluntness. But now, looking at the absence where my face should be, I felt the sting of something older, something that had been festering long before today. The whispers across the street grew louder, another neighbor slowing as she carried her groceries. Her eyes flicked between the door and the scattered clothes, and she frowned. Her lips pressed tightly, as though she wanted to ask, but thought better of it. She walked on, leaving only the sound of her footsteps receding down the sidewalk. I clutched the torn photograph to my chest. My pride, already battered, cracked beneath the weight of the image. This wasn't just about being thrown out. It was about being erased deliberately, piece by piece. First from the house, then from my daughter's loyalty, and now from the very memories we once shared. I sank onto the curb, the concrete cool beneath me, and closed my eyes. Images came unbidden. Seraphine as a little girl chasing fireflies in the yard, her laughter ringing through summer nights, her first piano recital, my hands trembling as I pinned her hair back, the nights I worked double shifts, walking home in the dawn light to make her breakfast before school. Every sacrifice, every moment, every thread of my life had been tied to her, and now she had allowed me to be cut away. The torn photograph lay heavy in my lap, its sharp edges biting into my palm. Above me, the house loomed silent and unyielding. The curtains still drawn, the lock still firm, as if it belonged only to those inside. I lifted my head slowly, my eyes fixed on that door. They might think they had succeeded in discarding me and making me invisible. But the gap on that photograph, raw and jagged, told me something else they had been planning this long before I ever set foot in the hospital. And that thought, sharp as glass, carried me into the darkness settling over the street. I sat on the curb with the torn photograph clutched in my lap, the shadows of the evening stretching long across the street. The ache in my chest pulsed in time with my heartbeat, but it wasn't just the scar from surgery that throbbed. It was the humiliation, the betrayal, the shame that threatened to pin me to the concrete and keep me there. But I had spent a lifetime refusing to stay down. For 40 years I had worked as a nurse, walking into rooms heavy with grief, into wards echoing with pain. I had held the hands of the dying and comforted the families left behind. There were nights I staggered home after 12 hours on my feet, my back screaming, my eyes burning, only to shower, press my uniform, and go back for another shift. It had taken resilience to keep showing up, discipline to push through exhaustion, compassion to keep giving when I felt emptied out. I had survived the harshness of life before. I could survive this. I lifted my chin, staring at the locked door, at the hateful note, at the house that was both fortress and prison. They wanted me to crumble, to slink away quietly. That was why they had thrown my clothes into the street, why they had left the curtains drawn tight. Humiliation was the weapon, and they expected it to be enough. But I hadn't lived 68 years just to fold beneath cruelty. I thought of my father, a man who had never owned much, but had guarded what little he had with dignity. When I was a girl, he would pat the worn folder he kept in his desk drawer and say, "Keep your papers safe, Eleanor. One day they might save you." At the time, I hadn't understood. Papers seemed lifeless compared to people. But he was right. Documents had power. Proof could cut through lies. I still had my folder. My hospital bag rested near the steps where I had dropped it earlier. I bent and pulled it toward me, my hands shaking, but determined. Inside, beneath discharge instructions and pill bottles, I found the battered leather case I had carried for years. The zipper stuck, but after a tug, it opened, revealing the stack of documents I had guarded as carefully as my father once had. I slid out the folder of mortgage papers, the deeds stamped with official seals, each line etched with my name. Not Thomas's, not Seraphine's. Mine. Every extra shift, every hour of overtime, every missed holiday had poured into this house, and those pages bore witness to it. The weight of the papers steadied me. My hands still trembled, but not from weakness anymore. From resolve. I rose slowly to my feet, feeling the pull in my chest, but refusing to let it stop me. Mrs. Caldwell was still watching from her porch, her arms crossed tightly against the evening breeze. She nodded once when she saw me stand, as though she understood without a word that I was done bowing my head. I gathered the papers against my chest like a shield. They couldn't erase me, not when my name was printed in black and white, signed, sealed, and filed in county records. They could throw my clothes in the dirt, tear me from photographs, laugh behind locked doors, but they couldn't strip me from these pages. I turned back to the house, my eyes lingering on the window where the curtains shifted as though someone inside had moved. My grip on the documents tightened. They wanted me gone. But this house carried my years, my sweat, my sacrifices, and now I had proof in my hands that it was still mine. I pressed the folder close, steadying my breath as I prepared for what would come next. The time for humiliation was over. The time to fight had begun. The folder felt heavy in my arms, heavier than any burden I'd carried from the hospital. I pressed it against my chest, drawing strength from the weight of the proof inside. My name was printed there in black and white. No matter how much they laughed behind the door, no matter how loud the whispers on the street grew, the truth lived in those papers. Still, I couldn't ignore the reality in front of me. I was locked out of my own home. My clothes littered the yard. A stranger's laughter echoed where my memories should have been safe. Proof alone wasn't enough. I needed help. I pulled out my phone again, my thumb hovering over the keypad. My hand shook, not just from weakness, but from the enormity of what I was about to do. I had never been the type to call for intervention. All my life I solved problems quietly, working double shifts, patching wounds with steady hands, keeping my own hurts hidden. But this wasn't a wound I could stitch closed. This was theft, plain and bold, and if I didn't stand up now, I would lose everything. I dialed. The numbers beeped in steady rhythm, and the line rang once before a calm, practiced voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. My breath came ragged, as though the act of telling would make it too real. Then I forced the words out. My name is Eleanor Vera. I've been locked out of my home. My son-in-law has thrown my belongings outside. There's someone else in my house, and I have proof that I live here. The operator's tone never wavered. Ma'am, are you safe right now? I looked around at the yard, at the cardigan still muddy from the gutter, at the curtains pulled tight against me. I'm outside, but I'm not safe. My heart is weak. I just came from the hospital, and they won't let me in. She asked for the address, which I gave, my voice steadier now. She promised officers would arrive shortly. Relief mingled with dread as I ended the call. I slid the phone back into my pocket and closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling the cool evening air. A sound from behind the door jolted me. The knob rattled as if tested from the inside, and then Thomas's voice rang out, muffled but unmistakable. You don't get it, do you? He called through the wood. This is my house now. You abandoned it. You abandoned her. Go back to the hospital where you belong. His words hit like stones. I stepped closer to the door, clutching the folder until my knuckles whitened. I never abandoned anything, I said, my voice low but firm. This house is mine too. You can't just throw me out. A woman's laugh drifted faintly behind his voice, the same one I'd heard before. It sliced through me sharper than his cruelty. He wanted me to hear it. He wanted me to know I had been replaced. You're making a scene, Thomas sneered. You're sick. You're unstable. No one's going to believe you. I pressed my forehead against the door, my pulse racing, my chest tightening. But then I remembered the folder pressed to me, the papers inside, the signatures and seals. I whispered to myself, almost a prayer, I have proof. I'm not powerless. Mrs. Caldwell's voice floated over from her porch. Don't listen to him, Eleanor. You've done the right thing. The police will be here. I lifted my head, steadied my breath, and stepped back onto the porch. The house loomed silent again, but the sound of sirens was somewhere in the distance, now faint but drawing nearer. I gripped the folder tighter, the night air biting against my skin. Whatever came when those lights reached my street would decide whether I was erased or whether I would stand. The sirens I thought I'd heard faded into nothing, leaving only the hum of distant traffic and the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Minutes turned into hours or so it felt, and still no one arrived. I stayed on the curb, the weight of the folder pressed against my knees, my clothes strewn across the lawn like a spectacle for anyone passing by. Every car that slowed sent a jolt through me, but none stopped. Each set of footsteps made me brace myself only for strangers to hurry past, with sidelong glances, some pitying, others smug in their curiosity. Whispers floated through the air like gnats impossible to swat away. She must have done something. Poor thing at her age, imagine being thrown out like that. The words clung to me even as I pretended not to hear them. My pride bled from every corner of me, but I forced myself to sit upright, to hold the folder in plain sight, as though displaying it would remind everyone that I was not a trespasser, not a ghost haunting a place I no longer belonged to. Mrs. Caldwell crossed the street, at last, her steps slow but certain. She lowered herself beside me, settling onto the curb with a sigh, her sweater pulled close against the chill. For a while she said nothing, simply letting her presence steady me. Finally, she spoke, her tone calm but firm. "I remember when you first moved here, Eleanor. You painted that front door yourself. Sky blue, wasn't it?" A laugh almost broke from my throat, jagged and bitter. "Yes. Took me 3 coats because I didn't know what I was doing." "I watched you," she said. "After your husband passed, you didn't sit still. You worked those long shifts and still managed to keep this house standing. Everyone on this street knows how hard you fought for it. Don't think for a second they don't." I turned toward her, my eyes stinging. "Then why do they whisper like I'm already gone? Like I've been discarded?" Her hand found mine warm despite the evening air. "People whisper because they're afraid it could happen to them. They'd rather imagine you're at fault than admit cruelty lives next door." I wanted to believe her, but the murmurs drifting from across the street told a harsher truth. 2 women stood by a mailbox, their arms folded tight, their words clipped but audible enough. Families fall apart when someone clings too hard. Maybe she should let it go. The shame crawled higher up my spine. I clenched the folder tighter, feeling the edges press into my palm. Mrs. Caldwell leaned closer. "Don't you dare let their ignorance define you. You've held dying men's hands, Eleanor. You've delivered babies, calmed frightened children, carried people through their darkest nights. I've seen you leave for work at dusk and come home at dawn, and still you made it here in time to tend that garden. That's who you are, not this mess on the street." Her words pierced through the humiliation like a shaft of light. My memories of the ward rose before me. Patients leaning on me, colleagues, counting on me, strangers, depending on the steadiness of my hands. I had been their anchor when chaos surrounded them. And now I sat in the dirt, wondering if I had forgotten how to be my own. More neighbors drifted past, some offering small nods, a bag of clothes picked up and returned to my pile, while others only stared. The mix of sympathy and judgment swirled around me, each glance a verdict I couldn't escape. But Mrs. Caldwell stayed firm at my side, her shoulder brushing mine, her voice steady. "You will not be remembered as a woman discarded. Not while you still have fight in you." I drew in a breath, shaky but deep. The folder rested like a shield across my lap, the weight of it, both anchor and weapon. My humiliation hadn't vanished, but beneath it pulsed something older, stronger, the resolve I thought I'd lost. I lifted my eyes to the street just as the faint glow of headlights turned the corner, sweeping across the darkening pavement. The headlights washed over the curb where I sat, flooding the scattered heap of clothes with cold white light. The patrol car slowed, then stopped directly in front of the house. My heart clenched as two doors opened almost in unison. A tall man stepped out on one side, broad-shouldered with a steady gait, while a woman emerged on the other, her posture sharp, her eyes already scanning the scene. "Officers," Mrs. Caldwell called, softly rising to her feet. She placed a hand on my shoulder before stepping aside as if to frame me clearly in their line of sight. I forced myself up, clutching the folder of documents tightly against my chest. My knees wobbled, but I stood firm. The male officer approached first. "Ma'am, can you tell us what's going on here?" His name tag caught the glow of the headlights. "Grant." Before I could speak, the front door swung open. Thomas appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression fixed in false concern. "Officers," he said smoothly, "thank you for coming. My mother-in-law is confused. She doesn't live here anymore. She left. I've been trying to manage things, but she's making a scene." The words stung, even though I had expected them. I tightened my grip on the folder, my nails digging into the leather. Officer Delgado, the woman, narrowed her gaze. "Sir, we'll need to hear both sides." "She doesn't live here." Thomas repeated, his voice louder, now meant to drown me out. "She's been gone for days. She abandoned the house. I've moved on, and she refuses to accept it." Mrs. Caldwell stepped forward, her voice steady. "That's not true, and you know it. She was taken to the hospital in an ambulance last week. Everyone here saw it. She didn't abandon anything." Grant turned back to me. "Ma'am, do you have proof of residence?" My hands trembled as I opened the folder, sliding out the mortgage papers. "Yes," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, but firm enough. "My name is on every page. I've lived here for decades. He can't lock me out." Delgado took the documents, scanning them carefully beneath the beam of her flashlight. She nodded once, passing them to her partner. "Her name is right here," she confirmed. Thomas's jaw tightened. "She's unstable. She's sick. She's not fit to be here. You can't just take her word for it." I opened my mouth to answer, but a new figure stepped into the doorway. A young woman, her hair sleek and dark, wearing one of Thomas's shirts as though it belonged to her. I had expected her laugh, her presence, her smugness. What I hadn't expected was the folder she carried under her arm, embossed with the gold seal of a local realty office. Delgado's sharp eyes flicked to the folder. "Ma'am, who are you?" The woman hesitated before answering. "Leora, I'm helping Thomas manage the property." Something inside me snapped into clarity. She wasn't just a lover. She was a realtor. My home wasn't just being stolen. It was being prepared for sale. My life reduced to square footage and profit margins. "They're planning to sell it," I said, my voice stronger now, anger propelling it forward. "That's why my clothes are on the street. That's why he forged my name. They want me erased so they can cash in." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then Thomas sneered. "Don't be ridiculous. She doesn't know what she's saying." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Leora shifted uncomfortably beside him, her eyes darting away from the officers. Grant closed the folder of documents and handed it back to me. "Sir," he said evenly, "her name is on the mortgage. Until a court says otherwise, she has every right to be here." Delgado's voice followed sharper than his. "And if you're trying to sell this house without her consent, that's a serious problem." Thomas's face flushed red, his confidence faltering. He stepped back into the doorway, his words tumbling into excuses too quick and too thin to matter. I hugged the folder close, feeling the shift in power at last. For the first time since I'd returned from the hospital, I wasn't the one on the outside. The truth was cracking through the lies, and the scheme I had stumbled into was beginning to unravel. The porch light flickered on above me, and I knew the fight was only just beginning. The night air felt charged like a storm was pressing down on our little street. I stood clutching the folder to my chest, the mortgage papers still warm from Officer Delgado's hands. The weight of them steadied me. My life, my years of sacrifice wasn't just a memory, it was ink on paper, a record that couldn't be erased with a cruel laugh or a forged signature. Grant faced Thomas squarely. Her name is on these documents. She has legal right to be here. For a second, Thomas froze. His mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came out. His gaze darted past me toward Mrs. Caldwell, then toward the neighbors who had drifted closer, drawn by the flashing patrol car. Eyes peered from porches. Blinds shifted in windows. The lie he had spun so confidently behind closed doors was unraveling out here under the streetlight. She abandoned this place. He spat finally, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. She was gone for days. She walked away. Mrs. Caldwell stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. That's a lie, Thomas. I saw the ambulance. I watched them take her. She was sick, not running away. Her testimony landed like a blow, and the ripple of murmurs among the neighbors grew louder. Thomas's face flushed deep red, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Don't pretend you know everything, he snarled at her. You've always stuck your nose where it doesn't belong. Better my nose than your lies, she shot back unflinching. Delgado raised a hand, silencing them both. Enough. This isn't a debate between neighbors. Facts matter, and the facts are clear. Eleanor's name is on the mortgage. She hasn't forfeited her rights. She's entitled to be in her own home. The words echoed like a gavel. My knees nearly buckled with relief, but I held my ground. I couldn't show weakness, not now. Thomas's eyes locked on me, cold and sharp. Then, in a voice dripping with contempt, he said, "You're confused, Eleanor. You've been sick. You're not thinking straight. You signed papers you just don't remember. You agreed to let me handle things." The gaslighting hit me like a sudden shove. For a moment, doubt stirred. I saw again the forged signature I had found in the gutter, the twisted imitation of my name. He was trying to make me believe I had betrayed myself, but I wasn't the woman he thought I was. I had worked too long, seen too much to let him twist the truth so easily. I held the mortgage papers high enough for the officers and the neighbors to see. My name is here. I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I never signed it away. I never abandoned anything. And you can't erase me, not with forged papers and not with lies. Grant nodded, his expression unreadable but firm. Sir, unless you can produce legitimate documents to prove otherwise, you need to stop obstructing her. Thomas's smirk faltered. You'll regret this, he muttered, though whether to me or to himself, I couldn't tell. His confidence was slipping, his stance less solid than it had been. He shifted from foot to foot like a man cornered. Leora hovered behind him in the doorway, her arms folded tight across her chest. Her face had lost its smugness. Now she looked trapped, caught between his story and the truth laid bare before her. Mrs. Caldwell touched my arm gently. Stand tall, Eleanor. Don't give him an inch. I did. My hands still shook, but it was no longer from weakness, it was from the surge of something fiercer, the will to reclaim what was mine. Delgado's voice carried finality. She goes inside. If you interfere again, you'll face consequences. The officers stepped aside, motioning toward the door. The crowd of neighbors shifted, some nodding in approval, others whispering behind their hands. The weight of their stares no longer burned as it had before. This time, it felt like a witness to truth, not shame. I stepped forward, each stride slow but deliberate, past the officers, past Thomas's glare, toward the threshold of the house I had fought too hard to build. And as my foot crossed onto the porch, I knew this battle was far from over. The wooden boards of the porch groaned under my weight as I moved past Thomas. He stepped aside grudgingly, his jaw set tight. His eyes narrowed into slits that followed my every movement. I didn't look at him. I kept my gaze fixed on the doorframe, on the chipped paint I had touched 1,000 times before. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the knob. The officers gave a curt nod, and then the door opened fully beneath my grip. A rush of air greeted me, familiar, yet strange. I stepped inside, my heels clicking softly against the floorboards. The smell hit me first. Not the faint lavender polish I had always used, not the undertone of lemon cleaner. No, it was cologne, strong and sharp, the kind Thomas had never worn in his life. My stomach twisted, bile rising at the intrusion. It was a scent that did not belong, an announcement that my home had been invaded, not just in body, but in essence. My eyes traveled slowly over the entryway. A pair of men's shoes, polished and far too new, sat by the mat where I always left mine. Beside them, a smaller pair of heels, sleek and glossy heels I had never owned. Their presence was loud, a declaration that someone else had walked comfortably across floors I had scrubbed on my knees. I moved further inside, the weight of my bag cutting into my shoulder. There, draped over the back of my favorite chair, lay a jacket, navy blue, slim cut, unmistakably not mine. I reached out, fingers brushing the fabric. It was still warm, as if recently worn. I pulled my hand back quickly, repulsed, as though I had touched something diseased. The living room stretched around me, familiar walls holding unfamiliar shadows. The photographs I had once arranged carefully were shifted, some replaced with generic frames. On the coffee table, a glass sat half full, lipstick marking the rim. My breath hitched at the sight. Every detail screamed of occupation, of replacement, as if my life had been boxed up and stored away to make space for theirs. Behind me, I could hear Thomas muttering under his breath, trying to regain some semblance of control. Leora lingered in the hallway, silent now, her eyes darting away from mine, unable to hold my gaze. I walked deeper into the room, each step heavier than the last. A strange duality pulled at me. One part of me thrilled at having crossed the threshold, at reclaiming the space they had tried to rip from me. But another part recoiled with disgust at what I found inside. It was mine, yes, but tainted. It bore their fingerprints, their laughter, their audacity. I lowered myself onto the sofa, the cushions dipping beneath me, and for a fleeting moment I felt the comfort of familiarity. Then the cologne stung my senses again, and the illusion shattered. My house had turned into a battleground, and though I had made it back inside, it no longer felt safe. The officers lingered by the door, their presence steady but temporary. Grant spoke calmly. "Ma'am, you have the right to be here. If there are further disputes, they'll need to be handled in court." His words carried weight, but also limitation. They couldn't erase the stain of betrayal clinging to every corner of this house. I nodded faintly, fingers tightening around the folder still in my lap. Proof had brought me back in, but proof couldn't wash away the scent of another woman's perfume lingering in the hallway, or the image of her shoes neatly placed beside the door. Thomas huffed, retreating deeper into the house, muttering about lawyers and mistakes. Leora remained frozen in place, her shoulders stiff, her jacket still draped across my chair. Neither offered apology. Neither admitted wrongdoing. I sat very still, listening to the ticking of the clock on the mantel each second, loud, insistent, reminding me that victory and violation now lived side by side in these walls. My home had let me in, but it no longer wrapped itself around me with warmth. I was inside again, but I couldn't shake the cold truth pressing down on me. I had walked straight into the lion's den. I moved through the rooms. With a quiet fury, each drawer, I opened a small act of reclamation. The house responded with the familiar creak of floorboards and the soft sigh of curtains. It was as if the walls themselves were listening for me to name what had happened here. I started in the foyer, fingers riffling through a jumble of mail and coupons, then drifted into the kitchen where teaspoons clinked in a drawer as if to mock me. They had tried to make it look casual, as if my absence had been unremarkable, as if someone else's arrival in my house was simply a new chapter. But the more I looked, the more I felt the seams of the story fray, mismatched coasters on my table, a pen I didn't own tucked into the cushion of the sofa, a pair of reading glasses with a prescription different from mine left atop the bookshelf. Little invasions that multiplied became proof of occupation. I opened the desk in the study, last the wood worn from years of my hands, restlessly sorting bills and birthday cards. The drawer stuck at first, swollen from humidity and age, but with a shove it surrendered, revealing stacks of papers I had once kept meticulously organized. My fingers trembled as I thumbed through invoices and old receipts until a folded packet slid free and landed in my lap. The first page was a notary form, the seal crisp against the paper like a wound. My name was there in looping script, but the flourish felt wrong, too deliberate. The pressure uneven in places the ink pooled where it shouldn't. My breath hitched at the sight. I unfolded the rest, my stomach tightening the further I read. Power of attorney. Authorization to manage her property, to sign on her behalf, to make financial and legal decisions in her stead. The document stated that I had granted Thomas full authority to handle the house and all associated affairs. The notary's stamp made it look official at a glance. The language was legal and suffocating in its thoroughness. I read the signature again and again until the letters blurred. My name was written, yes, but not by me. The handwriting mimicked the gentle loops I favored, but it lacked the small telling quirks my own pen left on the page. Someone had practiced, had studied, and had forged my signature with a confidence that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just an eviction staged for humiliation. It was an attempt to make every step they took legal. This paper granted them a way to move beyond petty cruelty to concrete theft. My savings, my accounts, any assets tied to the house could be misappropriated under the guise of authority. They hadn't only thrown my clothes into the gutter, they had attempted to hollow me out on paper to make my existence negotiable, as if I were property rather than a person. A cold wave of anger replaced the initial shock. The hours I had spent taking care of others, the years of overtime and careful budgeting, all the quiet, stubborn choices I'd made to keep a roof over our heads, it was all at risk because someone had decided to manipulate ink. My life reduced to a series of signatures and stamps that could be faked by hand skilled enough to imitate me. I clutched the packet, the paper crinkling under my grip, and walked to the window. The street outside was quieter now, the earlier crowd dispersed, but the house hummed with the memory of voices of plans. If they had gone to this much trouble, then Thomas's desperation meant there were other moves they were willing to make. This was more than spite. It was calculation. My fingers felt numb as I dialed the number that had become too familiar. Seraphine's. The phone rang once, twice, and then connected, and when her voice came through, it was cool, the same clipped tone she'd used before. I set the papers on the table where they could not be missed and steadied myself for the conversation I knew I had to have, even if it broke me in half to speak the truth aloud. The phone pressed cold against my ear as I stared at the forged documents spread across the table. My name, copied and corrupted, glared back at me. Each ring on the line dragged heavy in my chest until finally her voice came through. Mom Seraphine's tone was calm, even distracted, as though I had interrupted her mid-task rather than intruded on her life unraveling. "Seraphine?" I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to steady it. "I found the papers. Power of attorney, with my name forged. Thomas did this. Do you understand he's trying to take everything?" There was a pause long enough for me to think she had hung up. Then she sighed. "I know." The words hollowed me out. "You know he told me about it." She admitted, her voice still maddeningly smooth. "He said it was just to make things easier. In case something happened to you again. You've been sick, Mom. He thought it would be better for stability." For stability? The laugh that escaped me was sharp, bitter, foreign to my own ears. "Seraphine, this isn't stability. It's theft. He threw my clothes into the street. He locked me out of my home. He moved another woman in. And you call that stability?" Her breath caught faintly, as though she didn't want to hear the list spoken aloud. "You don't understand, Mom. He's been under so much pressure. Finances, the house, everything. He's just trying to keep things together. I didn't want to upset you while you were recovering. You didn't want to upset me." I gripped the edge of the table so hard the wood dug into my palm. "You let him forge my name. You let him strip me out of my own life, and you stayed silent. That didn't upset me, Seraphine, that broke me." Her silence on the other end was worse than any insult. The line hissed, faintly, filled with all the words she refused to speak. "Do you remember?" I whispered, my voice cracking, the nights I came home from the hospital after 12 hours on my feet and still cooked dinner for you. The mornings I braided your hair before school, even though I hadn't slept. Do you remember who paid for that house, who kept the lights on, who saved every dime so you could go to college without debt? Mom, please. No, you listen. My breath shook, but the anger steadied me. I did all of that so you could have a life built on respect and security. And now you let a man convince you that erasing me is the way forward. You think I don't see what's happening. You think I don't understand betrayal. I held the hands of dying patients who were more loyal to strangers than my own daughter has been to me. Her voice finally rose, defensive, strained. You're making this harder than it has to be. Thomas said you'd react like this, that you'd fight, that you'd make a scene. He told me it was for the best, and I believed him, because I can't keep living in chaos. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, the exhaustion in my body wasn't just from illness. It was the weariness of carrying someone who no longer wanted to be carried. I was never chaos, I whispered. I was your mother. Her breath hitched, and then the line went quiet again. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, but then came her soft reply. I can't go against him, Mom. I can't. The finality in her words pierced deeper than any forged paper or locked door. She had chosen. My hand trembled as I pulled the phone away from my ear. I stared at the screen, her name glowing in cold light, before pressing the button to end the call. The house was quiet around me. but it felt heavier now, suffocating with the weight of betrayal that wasn't just Thomas's. Blood had turned its back on me, and I stood in the wreckage of loyalty I once believed unbreakable. I gathered the forged papers from the table, my vision blurring, and pressed them tight against my chest. The betrayal burned, but beneath it something else flickered, a stubborn ember that refused to die. I wasn't finished. Not yet. The morning after that call, I sat in a quiet office that smelled faintly of leather and old books. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, spilling across the polished desk where attorney Miriam Hale rested her hands. She was a woman in her 50s, her hair cropped short, her gaze direct. There was no wasted movement about her, no false comfort. I slid the forged papers across the desk. My fingers lingered on them a moment longer before letting go, as though releasing them meant admitting again how far the betrayal had gone. She studied them carefully, her eyes narrowing at the uneven signature, the faintly smudged notary stamp. When she looked up, her voice carried a weight that matched the silence of the room. This isn't just sloppy paperwork. This is fraud. If proven, it's a felony. The word cut through me. Felony. Miriam tapped the page lightly. Power of attorney is not something granted casually. For someone to present this as legitimate with your signature forged means they intended to act on it. Not just with the house, but with any account or property tied to your name. That's not a mistake, it's a plan. Her calmness steadied me, but it also deepened the ache in my chest. So he could face charges, I said quietly. Yes, he and anyone complicit. The notary stamp here is suspicious. It doesn't match the official registry. Whoever helped file this could be in trouble too. She leaned back, folding her hands together. If we move forward, we could stop him quickly. The law would be on your side. I exhaled slowly, trying to let her certainty take root in me. Yet one name pulsed behind every word, Seraphine. She had admitted she knew. She hadn't held the pen, but she had allowed it, excused it, justified it in Thomas's name. If this went to court, her silence would be dragged into the open, and I would be the one to put her there. Miriam seemed to sense my hesitation. Her voice softened. I know this is complicated, but you need to protect yourself. Forged documents can't be ignored, no matter who benefits from them. I looked at the papers again, the loops of my false signature, the tidy lines declaring authority I had never granted. They weren't just lies, they were weapons sharpened against me, and Seraphine had let them be drawn. I've spent my life protecting others, I murmured. Now I have to decide if protecting myself means hurting the person I love most. Miriam's expression didn't change, but her silence gave me room to breathe. The clock ticked softly on the wall each second, marking the weight of the choice before me. At last, I gathered the papers back into the folder, pressing them close as if to shield myself from their venom. My hands no longer trembled. I'll fight, I said. But I need to understand how far this will reach. Miriam nodded, once her voice steady. Then we begin today. Her certainty followed me out of the office, but the question lingered heavier than the folder in my arms. Could I bear the cost of dragging my own daughter into the light of a courtroom? The thought carried me into the cool air outside, where the world moved on, unaware that mine was preparing for war. When I returned home from Miriam Hale's office, the folder of documents pressed against my ribs like armor. I found Mrs. Caldwell waiting on her porch. She waved me over her hand, firm and insistent. Inside her living room, the curtains drawn tight, half a dozen neighbors sat in mismatched chairs. I froze in the doorway, uncertain, but Mrs. Caldwell guided me forward with a hand on my shoulder. They need to hear from you, she whispered. For years I had thought of myself as an island, working late shifts, coming and going in the half-light, nodding politely, but rarely pausing long enough for more than small talk. Yet here they were gathered for me. A younger couple from 2 houses down spoke first. We saw your ambulance leave last week. You didn't abandon the house. Everyone here knows that. Another neighbor, Mr. Lang, leaned forward on his cane. I've lived on this street 30 years. Thomas never lifted a hand to that yard until you were gone. Now suddenly he's telling people it's his house, doesn't sit right with me. Their words struck deeper than I expected. Proof wasn't only ink and signatures, it was memory, witnessed and shared. These people had seen me leave for shifts before dawn, had watched me mow the lawn, in the heat had heard the clatter of my tools when something broke. They carried fragments of my life I hadn't realized they noticed. Mrs. Caldwell cleared her throat, her eyes sharp. I told them what I saw. The woman staying at your house while you were in the hospital, the clothes thrown out. They'll stand by you, Eleanor. They'll testify if it comes to that. I swallowed hard emotion, pressing against my ribs. For days I had felt like a ghost on my own street, whispers cutting me down. But here in this room, those whispers turned into voices willing to rise with mine. I don't know how to thank you, I managed. You don't need to, Mrs. Caldwell said. You've given enough to this community without asking. It's our turn. The weight of isolation lifted just a little. I was no longer only the woman sitting on the curb with her belongings scattered in the dirt. I was part of something larger. Neighbors who had watched, remembered, and now stood ready to speak. As I left her house that evening, the sky stretched wide with the last light of day. For the first time since returning from the hospital, I didn't feel like I was walking alone. And with that strength at my back, I turned toward the battle ahead, knowing Thomas's lies would not go unchallenged. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the kind of chill that seeped through my clothes and settled in my bones. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my folder of documents before me, while Miriam Hale arranged her notes with quiet precision. Across the aisle, Thomas leaned back in his chair, smirking as though this were already won. Seraphine sat behind him, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the floor. When the judge entered the room, stilled. The case was called, and Thomas wasted no time. He rose with rehearsed ease, his voice dripping with false concern. Your Honor, my mother-in-law is unwell. She has a history of health issues, serious ones. She's just come out of the hospital. She's unstable, confused. She doesn't remember what she signed. That's why she thinks these papers are forged. He held up the fraudulent documents with theatrical flourish. She abandoned the home, and now she's trying to rewrite history. I've been maintaining the property for stability. Every word was a blade meant to cut me down. He wanted the court to see me as frail, unreliable, fading into irrelevance. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to rise when Miriam nodded. My health is not weakness, I said clearly, my voice carrying farther than I thought it could. I was hospitalized because I worked myself to exhaustion, caring for others, but I am not confused, and I am not unstable. I never signed those papers. My name was forged, and I can prove it. Miriam handed the judge our exhibits, the mortgage documents with my name in clean, steady ink, the testimony affidavits from Mrs. Caldwell and the neighbors, the notary registry showing the stamp used on the forged power of attorney didn't match official records. I looked directly at the judge, letting my words come slowly, each one anchored in truth. I've lived in that house for over 30 years. I paid the mortgage with every shift I worked, every night I came home aching. I did not abandon it. I was carried to a hospital bed, and while I was gone, he tried to erase me. But I am here. I stand by my name, and I will not let it be stolen. The judge studied me for a long moment before turning to Thomas, whose confidence faltered under the silence. When the gavel struck to call a recess, I sat down slowly, breathless, but steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt the power of my own voice echo back at me. The fight was far from over, but I had taken the first step inside that courtroom, and I had not wavered. The ruling came with firm finality, a temporary injunction in my favor. Thomas and Leora were ordered to vacate their attempt to sell the house suspended until the court reached a final decision. The judge's words felt like the first clean breath I had taken in months. 2 days later, the house was mine again. No more perfume lingering in the hall, no more foreign shoes by the door. The silence inside was thick at first, but it was mine, earned, defended, protected. I started with the windows pulling open curtains that had stayed shut for too long. Light poured in, striking dust motes into life. I scrubbed floors until my knees ached, washed every surface that bore a trace of them, and carried out the broken fragments of what they'd left behind. The work was slow, but with each sweep of the broom, each bucket of soapy water, I felt my pulse steady. Reclaiming the house became more than chores, it became ritual. I painted the walls of the living room in a soft cream covering over the scuffs that reminded me of their presence. In the bedroom, I opened drawers and found the smallest reminders hairpins that weren't mine, scraps of paper, in another hand. I threw them out with a steadiness that surprised me. When the cleaning was done, I turned to the garden. My body tired quickly, but I pressed seeds into the soil anyway, knelt in the dirt with my hands bare. Flowers would take time, but they would come. Renewal never bloomed overnight. It had to be tended, nourished, believed in. By the end of that week, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It was scarred, yes, but it breathed with me again. I stood on the porch at dusk, the scent of fresh paint still clinging to the air, the earth damp from watering. For the first time since stepping out of that hospital, I felt a fragile peace begin to take root. I had won back the house, but as the sun dipped behind the trees, another truth lingered. The walls might be mine again, but the wounds cut by betrayal still lived inside me. The house no longer smelled of strangers. Fresh paint and polished wood had replaced the staleness that once clung to every corner. My hands still bore traces of the work paint beneath my nails. Faint scrapes from the garden, but I welcomed them. They were proof of rebuilding, of reclaiming what had been taken. I stood at the small oak dresser in my bedroom, a single brass key lying in my palm. It was the last spare, the one I used to keep hidden under a flower pot on the porch. For years it had been a symbol of trust, an unspoken invitation for family to come and go. Now it felt different, heavier somehow. I slid open the top drawer, nestled the key inside, and closed it with quiet finality. This house was no longer open to intrusion. Respect had to come first. Entry would follow, only if it was earned. That evening, a knock echoed through the hallway. My chest tightened as I walked to the door. When I opened it, Seraphine stood there, her eyes red, her hands twisting nervously at her sides. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. The words caught in the air between us. She didn't try to step inside. She just stood there, tears threatening, but held back. I searched her face for the daughter I had raised, the child who once clung to my skirts in fear of thunderstorms. I found traces of her there, buried beneath guilt and choices I couldn't unmake. I didn't come to defend him, she said finally. I don't know how to undo what's been done. I swallowed hard, my throat thick with everything I wanted to say. Anger, grief, love, they all pressed against one another. In the end, I only nodded and opened the door a little wider. She stepped into the light of the entryway, but not farther. Her presence was fragile, tentative. The bridge between us was cracked, maybe beyond repair, but it hadn't collapsed entirely. I leaned close enough for her to hear my voice, steady, though quiet. Respect first, I whispered. Entry second. Her eyes filled, but she didn't argue. She only nodded, as though she understood that nothing would ever return to what it was, but something new might still be possible. When night came, I sat in the living room, the lamp glowing steady beside me. The house was mine again, safe, whole, waiting. And as the light held back the darkness, I wondered, when respect finally knocks, will I open the door or guard it? Forever outline Act 2, Resistance and Proof Change. 6-12. Act 3, Reclamation and Renewal, 13-17.